What is going on, OWS Fam, DFS Fam, YouTube Fam, Podcast Fam? Welcome to the first DFS Lab of the Week 11 2023 season. I am your host, JM to Win. In a moment, I will be joined by Keegan, KTM128. We will be building a roster for this slate, giving ourselves an opportunity to open up this slate, talk about some of the unique components on this week's unique puzzle, and build a roster together so that we can see some of the ways that we might put pieces together, and also talk through how we build rosters toward plus EV play that would be expected to make us money over time. With that, let's get started.
1 week season.
Keegan. So weird week on my end. Quick production note for any of you watching no DFS Lab on Saturday this week. Some crossed wires in communication on my end, where our holiday travel is on a Friday, kind of a non-ideal day for me to be traveling. Typically a day where I have a lot of podcasts and content. But so yeah, everything's kind of crunched around for me on this week. Weird week on my end. How about you, Keegan? How you doing?
Good week. It's a little busy. I don't know why it feels that way, but it feels like the week's kind of going by really slow for me, but not in a good way.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Maybe we're synced up in our minds. I feel like when you have a kid under the age of 2, every week's kind of like a bit of a big week, because you never know what'll happen. I'll tell you what though, I might have mentioned this last week, maybe I didn't. Goldie doesn't know that the time changed with daylight savings. So she already wakes up early, and so she's been waking up at 5 a.m. most mornings. Wow. And so yeah, that's been my life the last couple of weeks is 5 a.m. wake ups. Try to get a little snooze on the couch. This morning I got like 20 minutes of snoozing in across like 3 sleep sessions across an hour. She woke me up one time because she wanted to find her purse. She woke me up one time because she was sitting on me singing Encanto songs. She woke me up another time because she wanted to take a bath at 5:45 in the morning. So that's been my starts to the day lately. Maybe that's why the weeks have felt long, the days have felt crunched together. But
each stage I've noticed of the age has a different difficulty challenge to deal with.
Yeah.
Shout out to all the dads out there.
Shout out to all the dads, indeed. Yeah, I mean, all the stages have their own difficulties. All the stages have their own joys. Like everyone says, wait till they're teenagers. I'm like, man, teenagers are pretty dope. I don't know about like, I always like teenagers, but I mean, love the kids at this age as well. With that, nice little chat to start things out. You had a chance to look at this slate much this week?
Yeah, I looked at it a little bit. I did a bunch of hand builds last week, by the way, and
nice,
man. All the right players in all the wrong lineups.
Feels good though, right? You know what I mean? Like it's like, okay, that was there. It just didn't come together.
Yeah, it sucked, man. Because I had TJ Hawkinson because I had the thought like while building these lineups, I was like, man, I didn't really look at the Vikings as a playable team this week or last week, and I just looked. I was like, okay. Like viability wise, who can score 30 points on this slate? And I was like, TJ Hawkinson can definitely score 30 points. So I put him on a couple of my rosters and he blew up and it was nice. I also put Boyd on a couple. You helped me with the Noah Brown one. You put me onto him early. That was nice.
My dude.
It was great. Yeah. I had Pollard hurt me. D-Hop hurt me. Just, the big ones.
Yeah, the Pollard's going to be an interesting discussion point this week for sure, because again, everything points toward him, but I mean, like much more so than last week in terms of how teams attack Carolina. You also mentioned Hawkinson brings up an interesting point. I brought this up on the Winner Circle podcast this week, but a couple weeks ago I had low-owned Cole Kmet, and he put up 23 points against New Orleans back-to-back weeks. Kmet against them 2 weeks ago, Hawkinson last week. Really good tight end defense. They're not a defense you typically can get good tight end scores against, but got these low-owned 23 points from Kmet and kind of didn't end up mattering because Dalton Schultz put up 30 around the same price tag at high ownership, and Trey McBride put up 20, or I guess this was 2 weeks ago. Trey McBride had his down game. 3 weeks ago, Trey McBride had, I had good tight end scores, and Trey McBride had like better tight end scores or equal tight end scores. at an even lower price tag. Or was that 2 weeks ago? Did the Bears have a bye week? No, they did not. So, but yeah, and then we've kind of seen this, right? Like last week, same thing. You get Hawkinson, who wasn't as high owned as he should have been. Kind of some reports about the rib issue and how that might affect him and his playing time and all that. But then, everybody else gets the 25 points from Trey McBride. And so we're seeing tight ends pop off at a higher rate than normal lately. And one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of sharp DFS players putting out those double tight end builds. And I was looking through some things this week and just comparing like basic points per game, DraftKings points per game on Cole Kmet, Logan Thomas, Trey McBride. Trey McBride, kind of an iffy one because it's a 3-game sample, but he has that role is real. We've seen it in the past with Zach Ertz. Evan Ingram, who has 0 touchdowns on the year and yet averaging 11 DraftKings points per game. Compare their points per game to the wide receivers priced around them, and they're fundamentally better plays than the wide receivers priced around them. And the typical argument there, the argument in the past would be, yeah, but like a good game, an elite game from these tight ends is like 15 to 18 points, and you really want to be targeting 25 to 30 pointers, and you want to, go for these volatile wide receivers who could get you those types of scores instead of the tight ends who might top out at 15 to 18. But Trey McBride, 2 games in the last 3 weeks with 24 plus points. Cole Kmet has a 27-pointer this year, a 23-pointer this year, a 17-pointer this year, 15-pointer this year. So it's like not only are the floors there, but the ceilings are there. Logan Thomas, another guy who has a 21.7-pointer on his ledger. And then Evan Ingram, kind of an interesting one this week against Tennessee. Last year against Tennessee, he had a game, I think it was 8 catches, might have been 6 catches for like 142 yards and 2 touchdowns against Tennessee. Tennessee, one of the best tight end defenses the last few years. But how about this? Evan Ingram, 67% of his snaps this year have been in the slot or out wide. Like he's listed as a tight end, but he's not a tight end. He's their number 3 wide receiver. And so, this tight end pool, and even going up to like the Kincaids and Laportas, just a really interesting, way to adjust our thinking. We're always looking for ways to adjust to the way that the NFL is being played and how we should adapt our DFS rosters as a result. So definitely going to be focusing on some double tight end builds this week. And even Tyler Conklin down here, 2,900, you look through his game logs and it's, 14 points last week, 12.6 the week before. He has a 10.7 pointer, a 9.8 pointer, a 10 pointer. As a guy who's sub 3K, you can't get a 3K wide receiver who's put up 3 games or 5 games of 9.8 or more DraftKings points, So, just some edge. Conklin, another guy with 0 touchdowns on the year, putting up those scores in spite of no touchdowns. Not that the Jets can be expected to score a lot of touchdowns, but just some really interesting angles to play around with. So, I don't know. Have you messed around with? I think you mentioned the double tight end builds a week or 2 ago. Have you messed around with those at all?
Yeah, I did one last week. I did Logan Thomas and TJ Hawkinson.
Nice.
With paired that with 49ers. Unfortunately, CMC got me 20-something points. But
man, and CMC, they tried to get him. I don't know if you saw this. They tried to get him that touchdown record, and he was, 5 more yards and a touchdown. He's up at 29 points because he gets the bonus as well. Totally different score. Yeah, it was a weird. It was a weird week for me. I had a horrible week in terms of results. Thankfully, a really good week in pick'ems, so I finished down just a little bit of money overall. But it was interesting because we talk about like how the sharpest DFS players, the people we're competing against for first place, these are typically the guys who are playing all the sports. And one of the things that they recognize is over time, if you just pick game environments and overstack them, you're going to make money over time in NFL DFS. So if you're grinding NBA 6 nights, 7 nights a week, sure, you're still putting in your requisite time on the NFL slate, but not as much time as the typical like hardcore NFL DFS player. And so they're not necessarily looking at, and I know a lot of these guys, right? They're not necessarily looking at each week and saying, okay, is this a week when it makes sense to overstack, or should I kind of do more skinny stacks this week? No bringbacks this week. They just kind of say like, look, if I do this over time, it's going to make me money. And so we should recognize that one of the edges we can have is spotting the weeks where it doesn't make as much sense to overstack. It makes more sense to have these skinny stacks or a stack with no bringback or whatever it might be. So I say all that to say, last week, I hammered all week that it was a week to overstack games, like pick game environments and bet on those game environments. So it's funny because I nailed that component of this last week's slate, but the game environments I bet on were, primarily Washington and Seattle, and then San Francisco with and without bringbacks. Funny because I even got those right? Purdy put up another 25 point or whatever. The 49ers scored over 30 points, but Kittle was my lowest owned of those because it's so rare that he hits when everybody's healthy. And then on the Commanders, crazy stat, I was pulling this up this morning. Sam Howell, 3 games this year of 28 plus DraftKings points. Actually, let me see if I can find this Washington write-up where I put this. Okay. Other quarterbacks in this slate with 3 games of 28 plus DraftKings points, Josh Allen, Dak Prescott. That's it. Tua has 2 games of 28 plus points. Herbert Fields, 2 games of 28 plus points. Stroud has 1 game of 28 plus points. Every other quarterback on this slate has 0 games of 28 plus DraftKings points. Sam Howell has 3 games of 28 plus DraftKings points. Nobody ever plays him except for me, probably you, probably people who listen to me. But Sam Howell, last week, had a bunch of Sam Howell, as I always do, put up another monster score. But Brian Robinson was the best stacking partner there.
30 point,
yeah. And I actually, on Saturday night, I was like, man, what would be interesting? I kept going back and forth. I was like, would it be interesting to do some Brian Robinson, Sam Howell, Brian Robinson, or wide receiver or pass catcher, didn't end up pulling the trigger on that. And then I didn't I had a bunch of Lions pieces, but I didn't heavily stack that Lions Chargers game, didn't heavily stack the Texans Bengals game. And those were the ones that if you overstack them, you hit on the right pieces, So it was a weird thing where I nailed the way to approach the slate. I nailed games that the scoring lined up, but just the player production didn't line up. And I missed the games. I knew that those were the other games to consider, but I just didn't, those were not the games I focused on. So it was just such a strange week on my end with all of that.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned the Sam Howell thing because they have a great matchup this week and he's still at 6,300.
I know. And it's the Giants are neutral in opponent pass rate over expectation, and the Commanders have the highest pass rate over expectation in the NFL. So basically the Giants aren't going to tilt them to do anything different unless the game just gets wildly out of hand, which obviously could happen. I've played around with, that everybody attacks Washington with quarterbacks, right? How far up could Tommy DeVito run the flag this week? How many points could he score? Can he actually put anything together? But then you look at his price tag and it's he's $5K and you go up just a little bit higher and you've got Brock Purdy at 5,800 and Sam Howell at 6,300. So I don't think I'll end up with the DeVito. The thing is, you could do DeVito, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, and it costs nothing.
Yeah, you can have some crazy lineups, but like you said,
you could have some crazy lineups built around that. But that's like a milli maker stack. Maybe the opportunity for that to actually hit is pretty low. In fact, DeVito completed, I think it was 63% of his passes in college, which is pretty bad. And he played 4 of his 5 years in the ACC, which is not top competition. He played 5 seasons. He didn't start all 5 seasons, but he played games in 5 seasons and only threw 43 touchdown passes, which, in college, these guys throw 50 touchdown passes in a season. So, DeVito's not that guy, clearly. Living at home, his mom says he's dead. Cooking him his whatever chicken tetrazzini that's ready for him when he gets home. Shout out to Tommy DeVito. But no, it's an interesting week, and it's another week where I wouldn't say it's the same as last week, where it's just stack up the games, but it is definitely a week where stacking up the games could viably be the way. I mean, that can always viably be the way to go. And again, our sharpest competition is always going to be stacking up games, but this is definitely a week where, to me, who's always kind of looking for, hey, is there an edge in not doing that this week? This is one of those weeks where very much stacking up the games could be the way to go. Speaking of that, any games that you've seen that have been standing out to you this week?
Yeah. One more thing before we get into the games.
Yeah.
I guess this would be getting into the games, but 2 quarterbacks I would like to know your opinion on: Justin Fields and Kyler Murray this week. Yeah.
I mean, we know running quarterbacks are a cheat code in DFS. I mean, look at Josh Dobbs, right? He's not an elite thrower. He's not an elite anticipatory guy. But when the play breaks down, he runs, and then all of a sudden he keeps putting up good. Even when he was with Arizona, right? There was one week where I really hammered the Dobbs doubles in my player grid and on my rosters, and that was the 1 week where he totally bombed. But he's got all these 20 and 25 point games as a guy who's not that guy. Yeah, both of those spots are really interesting to me. the Lions are one of these defenses that they're good because they're good. Like they're disciplined. They don't make mistakes. They're going to do all the little things right, but they're not like elite talent, right? And so what we've seen, I don't have the list of quarterbacks in front of me, but it's like, actually I can just pull up Goff's game logs just to see who they've played. Mahomes did not have a good game against them, but Lamar Jackson had a big game against them. Justin Herbert had a big game against them. Geno Smith had a big game against them. So it's like these good quarterbacks and good offenses are able to have good games against them. I wouldn't put Justin Fields into that category of, good quarterback and a good offense. But Justin Fields, one of his, 40 plus point games was against Detroit last year. It was on the backs of like 146 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. These 2 games this year, again, we have to account for the fact they were against Denver before Denver started putting things together, and against Washington, who everybody smashes. But these games where he had 335 passing yards, 282 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns in both games, that's really unusual for Justin Fields. If we look through his games last year, right, it's like if he passes for 200 yards, that's a good Justin Fields game. So it does come down to how many rushing yards is he able to put together, but the ceiling is there. And then same thing with Kyler Murray, where we saw a couple of years ago, last year before he got hurt, and I believe it started a couple of years ago, where he really just started running the ball a lot less and trying to become more of a pocket passer. But that was also a totally different coaching staff. And this last week, they really were kind of proactive in letting him run the ball. And so one of the things I really like about both these games, Detroit is probably going to score points against Chicago, and Houston is probably going to score points against Arizona. So you have quarterbacks who are capable of making big plays, capable of running the ball, and should be chasing points in these games. So I think I have I had like a list, kind of my initial, this isn't my official list, but my initial list had 6 quarterbacks on it. And then that was before the Deshaun Watson news. So that brings it down to 5 quarterbacks. And Fields and Kyler are 2 of those 5 quarterbacks. So
7 right now. I probably should lower that pool. But
no, I mean, I guess there's, what is there, 22 quarterbacks on the slate. I don't think there's a wrong number, especially if you're going MME. And this list, actually, this is like a list that I made, and I've since expanded it to add Stroud. So Stroud wasn't on this list. He is now, just because it depends on the Nico Collins situation. But if Nico Collins is out and Damian Pierce is out, it's just such a concentrated offense that it's a nice stacking opportunity in terms of, hey, put 3 guys on here and just get all these points. But it was, with Watson off, Stroud on. My list right now is Stroud, Fields and Goff in that same game, Kyler in that same game with Stroud, and then Howell and Purdy, which Howell is just like, to me, you play him every week. Even if you're a single entry 3 max player, you consider him every week. And Purdy's like a cheat code this week against that Tampa pass funnel defense, where are the 49ers going to score 30 plus points again for the 12th time in 16 games? Probably, because Trent Williams is healthy and all of their weapons are healthy. And every single time that's been the case, or all but one time that's been the case, they've scored 30 plus points. Playing this Bucs team that they can score points against, playing at home, a Bucs team that everybody passes the ball against. So Purdy, you're probably not getting like 35 to 40 from Purdy, which kind of becomes that thing of like, last week I got 29 from Howell, and that's tremendous. I got 25 or whatever from Purdy, and that's tremendous at their price tags. But then Dak goes out and puts up 41 or So, and I had a little bit of Dak, but not enough Dak. And if there's a quarterback who does that, then, same thing 2 weeks ago with Stroud putting up 46. And I had Dak that week at 32, right? As my highest owned quarterback. So if there's a quarterback who goes out and puts up that monster game, then you're kind of behind the 8 ball with a guy like Purdy or even a guy like Howell. But, Goff's not putting up 40 plus points. And so unless like Fields or Kyler does it, or Stroud does it, which again, that's, his only game north of like 26 points was that 46 point or so. It's these guys are really sharp plays this week, because if they get you those 25 to 30, that probably plays on this particular week.
Okay, sweet. I do have a wild card before we start making like a build. Just throughout their quarterback wise, what do you think about Will Levis? He's on my list as like questionable.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing with so I've talked about this thing of like not latching onto a negative data point, right?
Yeah.
First thing I did this week, flipping through the slate, one of the very first thoughts I had was, oh, don't play DeAndre Hopkins this week. And the thought process was, so what are the Jags good at and bad at on defense? It's funny because the Jags, you look at on the DraftKings app, you see this green 30th next to Will Levis. Like the Jags are the third worst defense against quarterbacks, the third best defense for picking on with quarterbacks. But the Jags rank 6th in DVOA on defense. In terms of EPA per play, which expected points added per play, which is one of the best metrics to look at. They're top 5 against the run and the pass. So that's, and DVOA is not as results based, and then EPA is results based. So like from both standpoints, the Jags have been excellent. So why have they put up these bad numbers? Well, what the Jags have is a really good secondary, really sticky secondary, really fast secondary, but a poor pass rush. So if the rush isn't getting to the quarterback, that gives enough time for these guys to separate. Or, you know, the two really bad games the Jags have had been against Shanahan and against Bobby Slowick with the Texans, where, you know, they're this Shanahan design where they're getting guys, scheming guys open, and then there's no pass rush. So they're able to get the ball to these guys in space. And what is DeAndre Hopkins? Well, DeAndre Hopkins is not a guy who separates. He's a guy who catches tight window passes. So if he's a guy who separates and there's a bad pass rush, that gives him more time to separate against, you know, a good secondary because the pass rush isn't getting there. If he's not a guy who separates, then it's just like a bad matchup because you've got these fast, sticky cover corners against a guy who doesn't separate. And he's like, DeAndre Hopkins wins by catching contested passes, but these guys are going to be better than most teams at defending contested passes. And that was like immediately. And then like, as I was scrolling through doing practice builds, I kept jumping over DeAndre Hopkins. And then it was like, dude, that's one data point. You know what I mean? Like it's one thing to look at and say, oh, Hopkins won't do well because of this. And then he could go out and put up 8 catches for 140 yards and a touchdown. And I'm like, well, shoot, like on Monday night, I crossed him off my list and never considered him again because of one negative data point. So that's kind of like, if I break the matchup down with NFL knowledge, then it's like, oh no, like I'm not on Levis, I'm not on Hopkins, because Levis kind of needs Hopkins in order to hit. But then when you like zoom out and you say, well, everybody throws the ball against Jacksonville. We know that Tennessee kind of doesn't lean toward what opponents want them to do nearly as much as other teams, but still they're going to throw the ball. They're going to probably be trailing in this game. And you get nice bringbacks with Ridley, with Kirk, with Ingram, with ETN. And so I mean, I think it's viable, right? Levis has that big arm. He can hit some big plays against Jacksonville. So yeah, the NFL knowledge logic side of my brain says cross that off your list. But then in terms of what could win you a tournament, and if I knew if I were just like a DFS grinder playing all the slates, I would look at this spot and be like, okay, Hopkins is interesting, Levis is interesting, you know, roll some of those out there. So I'm going to actually side with you on that one and say, like, what is Levis is probably last week he was the 3rd highest owned quarterback and he burned everybody, right? So like he's probably going to be 3% owned, something like that.
That's my fault. Yeah.
So if you're on 5-6% of your rosters, you're materially overweight the field. If he misses, that doesn't kill your weekend, but if he hits, you have that opportunity for it to make your weekend. And one of the things I thought, like, let's take Howell. Let's say Howell goes for 30 points. Well, you still have so much guesswork as to who hits with him. You know, McLaurin has 3 games of double-digit targets and 4 games of 6 or fewer targets. Jahan Dotson has 1 game of more than 8 targets, or 2 games of more than 8 targets. Logan Thomas has 1 game of more than 8 targets. So it's like you could get Howell right, and there's still a bunch of guesswork, right? Like you could have 30 Howell rosters and have to mix and match them a bunch of different ways and still only get like 6 of them right or 8 of them right. Whereas Levis, you could play 6 rosters or 8 rosters, and if you get Levis right, you get the stacking partner right. So that's a big advantage with Levis as well, is just that, like, knowing where the ball is going on that offense. You can play fewer rosters and give yourself like just as many bites at the apple at getting things correct as you can with DeAndre Hopkins. So yeah, I like that in terms of like throwing out some Levis rosters. I don't know for sure that I'll do that. I'll definitely have some Hopkins just because I'm training myself to say like, okay, here's the negative data point, but then also, does this guy have a tournament winning ceiling? You know, and if the answer is yes, and it's like, well, like, let me hurdle over that negative data point that's sticking in my mind and take some shots on him. So interesting question. Glad we got a chance to talk about that one. And it's cool. Like, we look at the top of the, talking about like the numbers next to these quarterbacks, look at the top of the app and you've got Josh Allen playing against the Jets with the red 6th. You've got Tua playing against the Raiders with the red 8th. You've got Herbert playing against the Packers with the red 2nd. You've got Dak playing against Carolina with the red 7th. And so, not to say that those are matchups we have to avoid. And those are certainly matchups that our competition will be leaning into to some extent. But just to say, like, all the guys at the top are in kind of negative matchups for one reason or another. Like Green Bay is not good against the pass, but teams bias heavily toward the run against them, right? Which is why they have low quarterback numbers against. Same thing with Las Vegas. Las Vegas, one of the few teams in the NFL that's just like dramatically better from an EPA standpoint to run against than to pass against, or like the gap between how valuable it is to run versus pass is great. Same thing with Carolina. Like Carolina allows, they're like, I think only 4 teams in the NFL allow a positive EPA per rush play, and Carolina is one of them. And then Carolina allows a negative EPA per pass play. So it's like you literally are losing ground when you pass against, like you're losing expected points when you pass against Carolina, gaining expected points when you run against them. So it's just like situations where the teams could, it's not that the matchup is going to kill Dak or Herbert or Tua. It's just that like they these price tags. And so, it becomes an interesting week where some of these guys we're talking about become a lot more viable. And not to say that I won't eventually gravitate toward one or two of those guys, but just an interesting way that the week sets up for sure.
Sweet. Love that insight. With that, let's build a roster.
Let's get to it. Looks like we got 2 days, 23 hours, and 31 minutes till kickoff. So we still got some time. A little countdown clock up there. You got any thoughts? I mean, I think we should essentially start this roster with a team or a game. So you got a team or a game you want to start with?
Yeah. Either I want to do either like the Lions or the Niners, if you're cool with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Lions give us opportunity for a bring back. The Niners, I looked at this last week in the player grid or somewhere, but basically broke down that the majority of the time that stacking up the 49ers has been the way to win a tournament since Brock Purdy took over. The majority of those games, no bring back has been the way to play it because just like the 49ers dominate. So, we can kind of go like 49ers with no bring back, or obviously we could do the bring back, but just like the most plus EV way is no bring back. We could do 49ers with no bring back or Lions with some Bears bring back. So which way you want to go there?
Man, let's do the Niners.
All right. So we're throwing Purdy, and then the question becomes, do we want to try to isolate just one pass catcher, or do we want to go pass catcher plus Christian McCaffrey?
Well, I mean, aren't they a pass funnel defense?
Pass funnel defense. McCaffrey has, he was in that same division with the Buccaneers for a long time. Historically, he's had, lower games against them because everybody has lower games against them. Yeah. That said, he didn't play against them in 2022 before the trade. He didn't play against them in 2021, or maybe he played against them like once in 2021 and like didn't play against them in 2020 or once in 2020 because of all these injuries that he had. So like we're really scraping back to 2019 for that. And then he actually played the Bucs with the 49ers last year, had 119 rushing yards, 34 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. So, in this offense, anything is possible. I wouldn't necessarily just chop him off the list, but it is a severely negative spot for running backs in general. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey's a special situation, 49ers offense, special situation, but I'm fine leaving him off, right? And then we can say, well, that just gives us more salary flexibility. Realistically, if you're building some Purdy rosters, you want to build them both ways. But I mean, we can go with no McCaffrey on this one. This kind of gives us a chance to talk about some other running backs.
I like that
well.
a lot.
So thoughts on pass catchers? Obviously, we know Kittle doesn't typically hit when Debo and Aiyuk and McCaffrey are out there. Brandon Aiyuk, 11th in the NFL in targets per route run, 2nd in the NFL in yards per route run. So the only reason he's not like a top 5 fantasy wide receiver is because he doesn't run as many routes, because the 49ers don't pass as much as most teams. So in a spot where they could be passing more, Brandon Aiyuk stands out as like, oh, this guy's like a top 5 wide receiver. If he were running 35 to 40 routes a game, he's just not in most games. So if we think that they're passing more, he becomes very interesting. And then obviously like that's just kind of like the logic tree on it. But Debo is also just a dude who is that guy, right? Like he can always hit as well. So I'm fine going with either of those on this roster.
Okay, sweet. And we're not doing a bring back solely because they just dominate.
Yeah, I mean, so there's that outside chance that, Mike Evans has hit twice this year, and I don't want to overrate something like this, but I've rostered Mike Evans twice this year. And it was last week against Tennessee, and it was whatever that was, week 2 against Chicago. Like, those are the 2 times that I was like, oh, you know what? Mike Evans is actually a really sharp play this week. And so I say that to say you can kind of spot the spots where, those are like really bad pass defenses that aren't able to contend with big bodied dudes running down the field. Whereas, he'll hit some plays here, maybe get 18 to 20 points, but harder for him to have like a 30+ point game against the 49ers. So realistically, the likeliest outcome is like a 35 to 14 or 35 to 17 or 42 to 10, one of those types of games that the 49ers can have, which means a bring back isn't necessary.
Okay, cool. Well, then let's just not do a bring back, and let's go with Debo. Maybe try and save some salary here.
I like it.
We're not going to be playing CMC.
Yep.
See what we can do.
Cool. We can go to this line. So I was going to say we can go to this Lions and Bears game and do like a little correlated pairing. This Lions and Bears game is so interesting. So the Bears, Matt Eberflus is the Bears head coach. Used to be the Colts defensive coordinator. He runs this Tampa 2 defense, and everything in Eberflus's defense funnels passes away from wide receivers and toward tight ends and running backs. So there were like years where the Colts didn't have like elite talent on the outside, but they would year in and year out be like a bottom 3 matchup for wide receivers and the top matchup in the NFL for pass catching running backs. So what's interesting here, actually, just like Eberflus's old Colts defenses, the Bears are really good against the run. In fact, by like EPA per play, they are the single best defense in the NFL against the run. Teams see that. Teams actually throw the ball at a pretty high rate against Chicago. So we shouldn't, like, running backs aren't really the way to go here. But what's interesting is since that Mike Evans game in week 2, they've allowed, I think it's like 1 wide receiver to go over 79 yards against them. So like Chicago has been, I'm going to try to find this. Okay. So counterintuitively, the Bears have gone 8 consecutive games. Here we go. This is nuts. The Bears have gone 8 consecutive games without allowing a wide receiver to top 65 yards against them. A stretch that includes games against Washington, Minnesota without Jefferson, but with Cousins, Las Vegas, the Chargers, New Orleans, and Carolina. So that's McLaurin, Addison, Devontae, Keenan Allen, Olave and Shaheed, and Adam Thielen. None of them topped 65 yards in this matchup. So it's one of those where you look at it and you're like, well, dude, the Bears, they're bad against the pass. Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to smash in this spot. And I think a lot of people will lean into that. And he's one of those, like we said, with CMC against the Bucks. Like, you don't want to overrate the matchup, but it's also one of those that if all of your competition doesn't understand the matchup, there is an edge in just saying like, well, like, we play out the slate 100 times. There's going to be times when St. Brown hits, but it's going to be at a lower rate than the field is going to think. And I could see him being one of these guys who, you look at these wide receivers at the top, Tyreek Hill, probably still going to be popular, even though the Raiders don't give up a lot of production to wide receivers, but CeeDee Lamb against Carolina maybe gets a little bit lower ownership. Diggs against the Jets definitely gets lower ownership. Keenan Allen against Green Bay, potentially, if people understand that teams run the ball against Green Bay, gets a little bit lower ownership. And you see Amon-Ra St. Brown, he doesn't have that red number next to his name. And it's like, oh, this dude's going to smash this week. So I think he's a very comfortable play. Like, he's a very comfortable button to push, which means I could see him being 20, 25% owned. And we play out the slate 100 times, man. He's not putting up 30+ points 20 to 25% of the time. So I think there's some edge in going a different direction. Then the question I'm stuck with is like, yeah, but who do you play on the Lions, right? Because the way to attack them is tight ends, but also tight ends or like pass catching running backs. But is Gibbs going to get enough work at 7K to be like, oh, pass catching running back, like throw him out there? Bears have been atrocious against running backs through the air, but does Gibbs get, 3 catches last week with David Montgomery back? So it's like, does he get enough work in that area for it to really matter? So yeah, it's kind of started that out to say like, yeah, we should have a Lions Bears mini pairing, but then it's kind of like this Lions situation is very interesting. It could be one of those games, Lions spread the ball around. It could be one of those games where they score 30+ points, but there's not like at their price tags, not a single guy who really was a nice tournament play.
Yeah.
Lots of guys get involved. Nobody really sees concentrated targets except St. Brown. And it's not as great of a spot for him as people might think. So
also,
yeah.
I feel like there is that underlying fear of, does the coach switch back the roles, or do they both just split the carries between Gibbs and Montgomery? So that's also a big thing, especially at their price tags. It's something you really don't want. So
yeah, I think at this point we're definitely going to keep seeing a split, because one of the things, we've talked about this before, but coaches don't care about statistics. I mean, there are guys like Sean Payton, Kyle Shanahan, who will go out of their way to get like their player a record if it's something like that. But in terms of like, oh, this guy got this many touches and this many yards, coaches don't care about that, right? They care about the win. And one of the things that the Ben Johnson and the Lions are so good at is keeping a defense off balance. The Chargers talked last week about after they played the Lions, they said basically like everything they had prepared for on defense, the Lions did the opposite. And if you kind of break down that game, everything that the Chargers were calling on defense, the Bears were doing something that like countered what the Chargers were calling, right? And so that's kind of how the Lions succeed on offense. Isn't like, oh, we've got this one great weapon. It's not Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs where it's like, hopefully this connection works today. For the Lions, it's like, dude, we have so much that we can do, and we're going to throw Khalif Raymond at you and Jameson Williams and Josh Reynolds and St. Brown and Laporta and Gibbs and Montgomery, and like all these guys are going to be involved. They're all going to be used in different ways. This is going to build off this. This is going to play off that and keep you off balance. And so, yeah, I mean, it's easy to have these Lions games where they put up a bunch of points and nobody really produces. Probably for any of you watching this, probably a pretty valuable discussion on this particular week, unless that ends up being one of those negative data points that doesn't like play out, in the small sample size of this week. But that is very much like, it's one of those spots where if there's a matchup component that is very real and that the field won't be aware of or understand, there is always an edge over time and just being like, well, let me lean into that because we know it could play out the other way, but like the field is going to overrate this spot for the Lions and their ability to predict who's going to hit in this spot. So yeah, maybe we don't go with a mini correlated pairing there and just kind of go a different direction. Any thoughts on what we might want to do next on this roster?
We could, we just talked about not even grabbing anything off the Lions, but we could grab Sam Laporta if you wanted, if we don't see any other opportunity.
Yeah. And I mean, at 5,800, when you compare him to, only one game this year over 20 DraftKings points, no games. Only one game over, 3 games over 19 DraftKings points. But all of those were kind of supported by touchdowns. So it's not like he doesn't have like a downfield role. You compare him to the wide receivers priced around, kind of the opposite of what we're talking about with the cheaper tight ends. You compare him to the wide receivers priced around him. Obviously, Amari doesn't have a quarterback anymore, but just for sake of example, right? Like Amari, 27.6 points with Deshaun Watson, 27.9 points with Deshaun Watson. DeAndre Hopkins has this 37-pointer on his ledger and a 25-pointer on his ledger. Tank Dell has a 32-pointer, a 28-pointer on his ledger. So you are kind of sacrificing some ceiling by spending that salary on Laporta. But, if we want to say like, and that's not to say that I won't have any Laporta. It's just like, that's going to be a tougher one for me to pull the trigger on from like a salary allocation standpoint. So
just grabbing it like as a one-off then. So you wouldn't really use Laporta this week as a one-off, more so as a stack.
I think that if I'm playing Laporta, it's probably going to be in stacks around that game. Yeah.
Okay.
Because then you're saying like last week, broke down all the reasons why like Keenan Allen was a bad one-off. But if you're stacking up that game, that's where you play Keenan Allen, because you're just like, dude, I'm just betting on this game going nuts. And if this game goes nuts, like I don't want to try to predict who gets the points. Like I just want guys from guys who are involved in this offense. So yeah, like Laporta, I kind of see him as this guy who, if I'm building Goff and Fields rosters, he's going to be in the mix more. Same with Amon-Ra St. Brown, where I can look at this list and like, dude, 8 straight games, all these good wide receivers, none of them top 65 yards. Like I probably won't play a lot of St. Brown as a one-off. But if you're just playing that game environment, you're just betting on it being like a 35-31 game, in which case I'm not overthinking like the matchups and all that. It's just like, dude, like somebody's going to be scoring the points, and the guys who are most involved are the likeliest to be scoring those points. So yeah, that's where I see Laporta fitting in for me.
Okay, sweet. Well, then where would you like to go on tight end? Like what do you see some spots where like you could use a one-off on a tight end? I like Trey McBride this week.
Trey McBride's one of those that it's so obvious that you almost feel like a fish playing him. You're like, I must be one of the dummies who's just like playing this guy. And like, you're going to hear sharp people be like, don't play Trey McBride. But no, dude, like, I mean, this guy was a second round pick last year. And most tight ends this year has been unique with Musgrave and Laporta and Kincaid. But like historically, tight ends take 2 to 3 years to really get their feet under them because there's so much asked of the tight end position in the NFL. So, this is a dude who was a second round pick last year and now getting a chance to start, 14 and 9 targets, 95 and 131 yards, in 2 of these last 3 games. So no, I very much like McBride, and it's a great tight end matchup as well. So McBride, Evan Ingram, both really attractive guys down here. Let's throw in McBride. Let's go ahead and do that.
Awesome. And then let's get that good old sense of salary with the defense.
What are you seeing with defense?
I honestly haven't like dived into defenses too much. I've just like if I do a practice build, I'll pick just a cheap defense is what I've been usually doing. Obviously the Cowboys, but again, they're like 4K. You never want to spend 4K. You want to go down here and you want to spend whatever, 20.
Yeah. One defense that I've been kind of eyeing is Miami at home against Aiden O'Connell. Actually, let's check the Miami weather forecast to see. Hit up Google for the Miami 10-day weather forecast. So Sunday, 81 degrees, 67% humidity. I'm sure we've talked about this on the show before, but for anybody who's not aware of this, Miami Stadium is situated so that the opposing team stands in the sun all game. These guys live in Las Vegas. They don't practice outside in Las Vegas, I'm sure, but it's not like they're not used to heat. But that's a very different heat in Las Vegas than it is in Miami. And it's a tough place to play in November when you're not used to 81 degrees and high humidity and then going out there and sprinting around all game against this fast team. So, I think the Miami defense is interesting if we want to pay up a little bit. I think that, Sam Howell's really gotten the sacks under control. His time to throw has sped up a ton recently. So I'm going to skip over the Giants defense, Giants who had a really good game against Howell last time. And again, that's not a final decision for anybody watching. It's just like where my thoughts are right now. You've got Pittsburgh taking on Dorian Thompson Robinson. You've got Cleveland taking on Pittsburgh. You have the Commanders taking on Tommy DeVito. So, there's a lot of different ways we could go. As far as cheap defenses, I really don't know what's the cheap defense this week. The Panthers are a team that is average to slightly above average at defense. And you look through their game logs, like one game of negative points. That was against Detroit. They had 4 points at Miami, 8 points against Stroud, 7 points against Bagent, so that doesn't really count. 7 points against Derek Carr. So, they could get you 4 to 6 to 7 points and cost absolutely nothing. The Jets against Buffalo, obviously, super elite defense and, consistently one game of 4 points, one game of 5 points, everything else 7 and above. I think that those are kind of the cheap defenses that I've seen so far, but
they did have a 20-point game against Buffalo last time.
Yeah. That was like an all-time bad game for Josh Allen on the road on, what was that, Monday Night Football, first week of the season, Sunday Night Football, something like that. I like right now I'm gravitating toward kind of getting up to this Dolphins and above range, but an extra 600 isn't if it's like, well, I'm not playing the Panthers, so let me go to the Jets. And you're like, the Jets against Josh Allen on the road, or 600 more for the Dolphins against Aiden O'Connell at home. So I do think, and it kind of gives you a chance to play off of the Miami offense, saying Miami scores points, forces the Raiders to throw the ball more than they want to with Aiden O'Connell, and make some mistakes, against that deceptive zone defense of the Dolphins. Maybe gets one of those pick sixes. So, I'm kind of looking Dolphins and above right now.
Cool. Let's do Dolphins.
All right. One quarterback we haven't talked about is Dorian Thompson Robinson, who looked awesome in preseason and then atrocious in his first start against the Ravens, and sat behind PJ Walker after that. But I do think we brought up Levis. I do think in large field play, having a little bit of DTR is actually kind of interesting this week.
There he is. Okay. You said he sat behind PJ Walker, correct?
Yeah. So he's a rookie, super athletic dude. And basically, like, the expectation was that he might not make the team. He did such a good job in, PJ Walker had to step in for some starts last year with Carolina and looked way better than he's looked this year. Didn't look great, but looked way better than he's looked this year. So the Browns felt comfortable with, like, PJ Walker as their number 2. They got rid of Josh Dobbs, traded him to the Cardinals, traded him and a 7th round pick to pick up a 5th round pick to the Cardinals. And basically to say, like, hey, let's keep DTR as our, like, long-term project quarterback. Then Watson missed. They felt comfortable enough to put DTR in over PJ Walker on a short notice against the Baltimore Ravens, and he just got absolutely smashed. But I mean, we know how good that Ravens defense is. Yeah. So, and also not just like good talent-wise, but they are one of the most confusing defenses for quarterbacks. So you throw a guy in there in his first game. Not that the Steelers are like a soft matchup, but I just think Steelers are. I think they're like 5th in yards allowed per game, and they're just really good in the red zone. They're like the 11th best scoring defense, but they're one of the worst like yards allowed defenses. So it's not like a brutal matchup for DTR. I'm talking about guys who can run and get some upside. Like, he's the kind of guy who could pick up 60 yards on the ground, and he's got all those weapons, pick up 200 yards through the air. That's 14 points right there. So if he adds a touchdown or 2 on the ground, he's just like an interesting large field tournament play, not sharp for kind of what we're talking about here of building a practice build, getting a feel for the slate. But I just wanted to bring that up, that he is an interesting guy to consider in large field tournaments.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, thanks for that. I didn't even consider him.
It's kind of like Will Levis's first game, right? Like, where just people just aren't going to consider it. And we've seen Levis, kind of bomb from a fantasy perspective in back-to-back games. But that first game, he put up 26 points or whatever it was, right? So, like, the point is that these guys are capable of putting up those types of games. And DTR looked really good in the preseason, so that it's not like we haven't seen him play well against NFL caliber players. With that, we should probably move forward on this roster. We got $6K in salary left. What do you think? You want to swing over to the running back position and get a sense of what we want to do here?
Brian Robinson, what do you think about him this week?
I won't argue against him. You know what I mean? Like, we look through his game logs. He's got 3 games of more than 14 carries. And 2 of those were weeks 1 and 2 when this offense, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, still kind of trying to figure out how they want to play their offense. So I kind of look at him as like a 10 to 14 carry guy. Most games, 2 catches. So the big thing for him is just all the touchdowns. He's got 8 touchdowns. And that's not fluky, right? Obviously, the long touchdowns last week, but a lot of red zone opportunities, inside the 10 opportunities for Brian Robinson. So not a guy I've really been highlighting on my end, but he's definitely viable in terms of, can this guy get you a tournament winning score, right? And one of the ways we can look at running back is like volume is so predictable with running backs, and therefore production is pretty predictable. And so you take the high floor guys with a high ceiling, but the other way you can look at running back is just, does this guy have a high ceiling? And through that lens, Brian Robinson does. So, I'm down with Brian Robinson. Let's go ahead and throw him on this roster.
Okay. And then here's an interesting one. What about the narrative where the Browns are going to be throwing a lot less because they have a rookie quarterback, or because they have not as good quarterback, and so they're going to be running the ball a little bit more?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And they're playing against Pittsburgh, who kind of plays for the fourth quarter anyway and isn't going to jump out. I mean, it's going to be like both teams just trying to gain an edge heading into the fourth quarter. So you think in Jerome Ford here? Yeah. I mean, 18 touches last week, 25 touches the week before. Had the game where he was only played the second half and had 10 touches. Had the game where he got hurt and only had 13 touches. So throw both those out the window. If we throw both those out the window, his last 3 games are 18, 25, and 19 touches. Very much expect that. I got a little shook by, heavy Ford exposure against Arizona on the week when he had 25 touches and he put up only 12.7 points. but part of that's because he is like a kind of a home run hitter. He tries to hit the big play. And so if he's not hitting the big play, then he ends up, getting stuffed for shorter gains and the yards just don't pile up. So this is why we see, games of 44 yards, 37 yards, 26 yards, 18 yards, but then also games of 107, 74, 84, 106. So kind of like a wide range of outcomes, but he gets enough touches that even these bad games for him they're not awful games. They're not roster killing games. Throughout the Seattle game, because again, that's the one where he only played in the second half. So all these games, like 9.5 points or better. 9.5 was against Baltimore too. So all the rest of his games, 11.1 or better. That was against San Francisco. All his other games, 12.7 or better. So yeah, no, I like Jerome Ford a lot this week. And assuming Damian Pierce is out, I've actually run a number of practice builds that are Singletary and Ford because you free up so much salary for other things. And pricing psychology, we can look at the price tags on guys and be like, oh, these guys are only worth this, or these other guys are worth this. But in terms of workload, these guys are seeing what the higher priced guys are seeing. And I like throwing Jerome Ford on here. And then we have nice flexibility with our salary as well from here.
Sweet. So we're going to put him on there with the hopes of an uptick in the volume. He already does get a decent amount of volume, but we'll hope for some more.
Yep. I like it. I like it a lot. Interesting slate at wide receiver, right? Where we've got, we kind of touched on some of the 5K guys who are capable of putting up big games. And then we've got, not only like I'll have some Tyreek Hill this week. It's not a spot where I don't want to say he's not going to, but it's highly unlikely that he puts up one of his like 40 to 50 point games. Teams lean toward the ground against the Raiders. Miami should be in control of this game. The Raiders don't typically allow downfield passing, but also like Carolina doesn't allow downfield passing. And he caught 6 passes for 163 yards against them because he's Tyreek Hill. So I think Tyreek Hill is probably the most interesting of these ultra expensive guys to me. I expect the Cowboys to lean more run heavy in this one, harder time for CeeDee Lamb to hit. Diggs can put up, kind of a 20 to 30 pointer against the Jets, but that's probably his ceiling. The Chargers aren't going to be pushed in this game against Green Bay. I expect them to lean on the ground. We already talked about ARSB. So in terms of this like 8.8K and above, Tyreek Hill is my favorite. Just to throw my thoughts out there for you, for viewers. Cooper Kupp, obviously very interesting this week. Devontae Adams, my thought currently is hard for him to pay off that price tag at a had-to-have-it level with Aiden O'Connell throwing him the ball. Like, no matter how many targets he gets, it's just hard for a guy like Aiden O'Connell to, like, could Devontae score 30? Yes. Can he score, like, 40 and, like, bury you for not having him? No. And, like, the downside is really low. So, like, you take on really low downside and the ceiling's probably around 25 to 30. So those are just my initial thoughts on kind of all these expensive guys. And then we get down into like the Waddles and Thielen against Dallas and Mike Evans against San Francisco, Brandon Aiyuk, who we're not playing because we already have Debo. So in terms of like these top guys for me, it's Tyreek and Kupp. But yeah, curious if you've had any thoughts on these guys or kind of been leaning in any direction in your early thoughts on this slate.
Yeah, so my early thoughts have kind of been mostly similar. I really just avoided the top guys altogether. It's like the way I look at these like expensive guys is it's like, okay, are they more likely to hit 25 points or 40 points? Obviously, the 40 pointers are always going to be hard to find, but on this slate against this team, can they hit a 40 pointer out of 100 times, like 1 or 2? Yes. Can they do it 10 times? Probably not. So I avoid, like you said, the top 5 unless I'm stacking them with that team.
And I think it's a really sharp way to assess that because it's like people, we talked about this for years with Keenan Allen, which has gone out of the window this year in this Kellen Moore offense, but where Keenan Allen, like always high ownership rates, always double-digit DraftKings points. And heading into this year, he had like, I forget what it was, like one game in his last 30 of like more than 25 DraftKings points, And so people get too fixated on, I'm getting points from this guy. And those points are definitely going to be there that you squeeze down your salary. So it's like, if you roster one of these guys and he gets you 25 points, you're not like beating yourself up, but you're also probably not winning a tournament. Right. So I always say like 30 pointers are always valuable. So if you play, because there's only going to be a handful of those on most slates. So if you play Tyreek Hill and he gets you 30, that's still excellent. And I'll have some Tyreek Hill because he can do that. And because he's actually capable of like in just a random non-great game environment going for 35 or 40 because he can score from anywhere. But generally speaking, it's like if these guys aren't getting you 35, or if you don't think they can get you 35 plus, you don't want to be targeting them. So it's like maybe they all score 30 and you didn't have them, but like that doesn't kill you. And what you're asking is not, can they score 30? Yes, they can. But it's like, how likely is it that they get up to that 30, 35, 40 point range? And if you don't think it's likely they get up to the 35, 40 point range, they're really not that valuable to pursue on the slate. It's better to go other directions. Any thoughts on Cooper Kupp then?
No, I honestly haven't really looked at this game. Kupp's kind of been invisible just because of the quarterback situation. So
yeah.
No, I haven't. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Stafford coming back. This game actually, Rams and Seahawks tend to actually be pretty low scoring, but it has that opportunity to be kind of a higher scoring game. I actually haven't even looked through. It might be the Seahawks. There's like one team that Kupp has traditionally done poorly against in his division, and it might actually be the Seahawks. But no, like generally speaking, I just think, if I think that Cooper Kupp will be pretty invisible to people, right? And so when that's the case, I kind of want to consider him. But yeah, and there's also like we can go much cheaper at wide receiver, still target 30-point scores, and then just have some salary left over to see where we want to play with it, or to go like Austin Eckler at our flex spot or something like that. So yeah, where what are you thinking then for wide receiver?
Well, I mean, we're kind of short on time, but I do want to ask like two specific questions. So Marquise Brown and Tank Dell, can you use these two guys without their quarterbacks? Like, are they most of the time going to hit with their quarterback, or is it possible that the quarterback is going to get you like 20 points whilst they can get you 35 to 40 points?
Yeah, so a couple things to look for there are how concentrated is the offense in terms of like Justin Jefferson, right? All those times where Jefferson would hit for tournament winning score and Cousins didn't. And it's because like so many of the passes go to Jefferson that Jefferson can go for 140 yards and Cousins doesn't top 300, right? So Texans pretty concentrated offense. And then the other thing I'll typically look at is what is the pricing setup, right? So the fact that Stroud is 7K, but Tank Dell is down here in the 5K range. Like Tank Dell, even if he gets you 22, 23 points, that's pretty great. And if he gets you 22, 23, that does not mean that Stroud's paying off a 7K price tag, And then we can even just look at like what has happened on the year where Dell has a 28-pointer where Stroud would not have been viable at his salary on that at his current salary on that particular week. He has a 20-pointer where Stroud would not have been viable at his current salary. He has an 18-pointer where Stroud wasn't viable at his current salary, or not viable, but like he wasn't the guy that you needed to pay up for. So no, definitely Tank Dell can hit without Stroud hitting. Definitely Marquise Brown can hit without Kyler hitting because it's such a concentrated offense. There are so few weapons there. So we already have Trey McBride on this roster, so I'm sure we'll skip over Hollywood on this roster. But just to answer that question, definitely both of them can hit without their quarterback hitting. Currently, Nico Collins has said he is playing this week, but then Noah Brown missed practice yesterday. So ideally we get okay, now newest report is Brown remained sideline practice today as well. So ideally we get, one of these guys missing because then we get like a much more certain target distribution here. And if we throw in Tank Dell, we've got this nice little correlated pairing with Tank Dell and Trey McBride.
Sweet. I kind of want to do a little cheap, expensive, or I guess there's really not much on the expensive side. What would we even try?
I mean, we could go Tyreek Hill if we wanted to do that. Yeah. And we'd have 4.1K in salary left over, which would actually be enough for Cole Kmet if we wanted to do one of these tight end in the flex rosters. Yeah. Or we could go like Austin Eckler and somebody else. I kind of like the Hill and Kmet.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like who's gonna roll this roster out there? You know what I mean? And when you kind of look through it, it's like Debo can score 30, Tank Dell can score 30, Tyreek can score 30, Kmet can score 25, McBride can score 25. Brian Robinson has scored 30 already this year. Ford can score 25. So, I mean, there's just like a ton of upside packed onto this roster in a really unique setup. So, yeah, I actually really like this build.
Sweet. Yeah, me too, man. I'm happy we got the running backs so easily, but they also, they look good on top of just a cheaper side. We went with cheaper side running backs, but we still have a lot of upside.
Yeah. We didn't have to take any of the like super value wide receivers where you're like, hopefully they don't kill me. Hopefully they get me 12 points,
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we're like, this whole roster is pretty balanced, but we're still able to fit in Tyreek Hill because Brock Purdy's so underpriced, and because we went for the cheaper running backs who still have ceiling. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is kind of how I'll be building this week, is like start with what team or game I want to build around, figure out what that means for running backs, and then kind of piece together things from there. So any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Nope.
Cool. Good show today. Like we got to cover a lot. As I mentioned, no show on Saturday this week, so we'll have the FanDuel DFS Lab tomorrow. No second DraftKings DFS Lab this week. Check out Hilo on the Block Party Show with Pete Overzet this week, and everything else will be business as usual. Player Grid will come out hopefully a little bit early. Have my Roto Grinder show recording a day early today. Angles Pod going out today. So catch everything a little bit early this week. We will see you on 1 week season throughout the weekend, and we will see you at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.